This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with amazing humans who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and my guest this week is Brian Johnson. Brian is the founder and CEO of Heroic, a social training platform that Whole Foods co-founder John Mackey has called the best self-development platform in the world. Brian's also the author of the new book, ARETE, Activate Your Heroic Potential, where he tackles the struggles so many of us face in navigating life's complexities and challenges, often feeling stuck or unfulfilled. I'm super excited to unpack Brian's timely and empowering message on how we can all transcend life's difficulties and realize our full heroic potential. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Joe, I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad that you're happy to be here because I'm happy you're here. And I want to start by talking about optimism because me as a native New Yorker, optimism is not our thing. We kind of tend towards the negativity, but every once in a while, I'll be like, I like being optimistic. And one of the reasons I'm optimistic is the evolution of society and people in general in terms of embracing Eastern and Western philosophies. Growing up in the 80s, if someone talked about meditation or talked about Eastern religions, and even if you look back at like movies and TV shows that took place during this time, it was a punchline. It was like, oh, that's really weird. What is going on? What are they coming from? But we've evolved. Meditation is now readily kind of accepted. Everyone kind of does it no matter what. You don't have to be working in Silicon Valley to be into meditation. Like people all over the world are doing it. And you have taken this approach of combining Eastern and Western philosophies in what you do. So can you talk about that connection and how we've evolved as humans and be like, hey, Western medicine isn't just the only way of doing things. There's many different ways of accomplishing what we need to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've studied Western and Eastern, ancient philosophy, but my big thing is really ancient wisdom in general and then modern science. So I've obsessed, over the last 25 years, I've spent half of that time as a founder, CEO, and the other half as a philosopher from an etymological sense, a lover of wisdom. My favorite kind of preferred ancient wisdom flavor is Stoicism. But if you look at ancient Stoicism, the ancient Greeks, the Bhagavad Gita, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, they're all saying the exact same thing, which is the purpose of life is to be your best self in service to something bigger than yourself. And you do that by living with virtue, which again is why I've tattooed my body with the one-word summation the Stoics would give you on how to live a good life, which is ARETE, which we can talk about. But then modern science says the same exact thing. And frankly, I think that's part of why the ancient wisdom traditions and their practices are becoming so accepted these days, is that science is proving that training your mind, call it meditation or whatever you want to call it, works. So does eating well and moving your body and sleeping and basic fundamentals. And I think it's the integration of those two things, ancient wisdom and modern science. And more of us doing that gives me the most hope when I look forward and see how we're going to face these historically significant challenges. But yeah, long answer to your short frame. That's how I'm thinking about things.
Awesome. I want to pull a thread there about Stoicism because, as you know, Brian, Stoicism is having a moment. It's, if you look at an Amazon bestselling book, there's a ton of books on it. For the uninitiated, can you just give us a quick little explainer and why it's a big part of what you do?
Yeah, and Stoicism, it's a shame it went out of favor because it was the dominant philosophy of the ancient world. Like it's just, cognitive behavioral therapy. A lot of the modern psychologists, Viktor Frankl, are inspired by Stoicism. So yeah, it's become, frankly, in some ways overpopularized, but the essence of Stoicism permeates our culture before it became more popular. And again, if you asked the ancient Stoics how to live a good life, they would have answered you in a single word. That word is ARETE, which we translate as virtue or excellence, but it means something closer to being your best self moment to moment to moment. Now, rule number one of Stoicism is some things are within your control, some things are not. The practicing Stoic practices that wisdom, and the only things that are within your control are essentially your thoughts and your behaviors. Not your instantaneous reflexive response, but after that happens, how are you choosing to think? How are you choosing to behave? A practicing Stoic, and again, a practicing cognitive behavioral therapist is going to tell you the same thing. Control your thoughts, control your behaviors, create a great life.
and you're wearing an ARETE t-shirt for folks who are just listening to this. And obviously you mentioned it's a big part of sort of your philosophy of life, but when did you stumble upon this? Like, yeah, I don't think you walked into like a thrift shop and saw an ARETE shirt and said, hey, I'm going to get me one of those. When did this become such a big part of your life, Brian?
So I'm wearing ARETE on my t-shirt. I'm wearing ARETE on my right forearm, inch tall, 4-inch wide tattoo. I stumbled upon it studying Plato 20 years ago. This is what Aristotle and Plato and Socrates were talking about. So every time they used virtue, they were talking about ARETE, but fell in love with it. And over the years, it became a more central part of my work. And then as I was writing my book, which is called ARETE, I actually had a longer title for it. And I'm like, wait, the one-word summation of everything is ARETE. And it's kind of like Stoicism. You know, people say, well, how do you spell that? What does it mean? But it's one of those words that frankly should never have left our cultural vernacular. Why is it that we don't have a word that captures you being your best self moment to moment to moment? As Yuval Noah Harari says, nothing is either that we experience culturally is either natural or inevitable. Like we could have lived in a world where virtue was what was most taught and discussed throughout time. And so kind of bringing that back and making it cool, if you will, is a big part of my life's work.
Awesome. That's great. And it's funny that you bring this up about taking philosophy and learning about it. I always felt like philosophy has a terrible PR agent because I remember when I went to college for my brief little stay there, I took Philosophy 101, and man, it was boring as shit, Brian.
Dude, I hated my philosophy class at UCLA. Boring as poop emoji is exactly my experience.
And this happens with a lot of different studies where instead of trying to attract people, and again, you never want to attract people with just like shiny objects, but attract people in a way that you can connect with them. They do an awful job of that because I was so excited, like, oh, because I was a kid fresh out of high school. I'm like, oh, cool, philosophy. I never learned that. I'm going to go into college. I fall asleep trying to learn philosophy. What's up with that,
Dude,
Brian?
Philosophy, well, I'll tell you what's up with it from my perspective. And I had the exact same experience. Philosophy, Western philosophy or whatever, which should have been amazing, by the way. It was ancient Greek and Stoic philosophy. I hated it. It was one of my least favorite classes at UCLA. I wound up studying psychology, which is really just an applied philosophy. But Donald Robertson talks about this, and he explains, I think, why those classes suck. Philosophy has become too academic. It's become too pedantic. It's become too much about an individual, as Donald Robertson, the great Stoic philosopher, scholar, and practitioner, says. Modern day philosophers are librarians of the mind. They're cataloging various ideas, and in the process, they've lost the ancient art of the practice of philosophy. The ancient philosophers were warriors of the mind. These were not abstract ideas for them. They were practical, concrete ideas that needed to be practiced in your life today. And this is what the ancient philosophers did. You know, my favorite teacher, Epictetus, is on my wall back there. I got my heroes, right? He trained the guys that trained Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman Stoic emperor. So this is what Stoicism and philosophy was in the ancient world. It was a very, very practical pursuit. We've lost that in our modern world. It's all logic chopping is how the Stoics would have put it. They made fun of people that only talked about ideas and, you know, got really, really clear on how many angels can dance on a pinhead kind of thing. But it's like, all right, we lost the practicality. So I'm trying to bring that back. The ancient wisdom, the modern science, and the practical tools. Because this stuff works. I mean, when you actually practice it, it works. Full stop.
You're taking the words right out of my mouth because I feel like, you know, we could do a whole podcast about the faults of academia, but instead of trying to bring people in, like if you go, I joked about Stoicism, having a moment. If you go on Amazon, there are tons of best-selling books around all forms of philosophy, no matter what kind you're talking about. So if there's people hungry for it, why wouldn't you want to feed them while they're in college? Like that is the perfect time to give them the good stuff, and they don't do it. And I know you kind of explained it there, Brian, but to me, it's kind of frustrating because as I get older, I'm like, man, I wish I learned this stuff when I was in my 20s. And, if you're listening to this now and you're in your 20s, take advantage of it because you have more access to it than we did growing up.
Well, let's actually rewind. Why would we wait until our 20s? I got an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old. What do you think I'm teaching them? I'm teaching them how to live a good life. No, I mean, again, it's kind of sounds cute.
Yeah.
But, if you look at the research, willpower, for example, if you knew a kid's willpower and you knew their IQ, which one do you think would predict their academic performance better than the other?
Willpower?
Well, it was a loaded question, so obviously the answer is willpower, but I would guess IQ. If I'm guessing how well a kid's going to do in school, I'd imagine the smarter kids would do better in school. That would be a better predictor of their academic performance. The reality is willpower outpredicts IQ by a factor of 2 for academic performance and everything else. Well, guess what? Willpower is one of the cardinal virtues of every ancient wisdom tradition. They called it temperance, but it's really discipline, self-mastery, willpower. I shared that with a leading prep school in LA. They hired me to create content for them because this can be taught. So we don't need to wait until our 20s. We want to go all the way back, K through 12. How do we teach kids the most important skills to succeed in life and win the ultimate game, which again is to live with virtue, wisdom, discipline, love, courage, gratitude, hope, curiosity, and zest are the virtues most highly correlated with our well-being, and it should be taught, full stop. And this is a big part of my life's work, is getting it into our educational systems, getting it into our military, getting it into our corporate world, et cetera. Because I'm like you, dude, like, where was it when I was 20? And more importantly, where was it for my dad, who struggled with alcohol, and his dad who struggled with alcohol and ended his own life? Like, why is it we live in a culture where the most important things aren't taught? Now, having said that, this is a 2,500-year-old challenge. Every single culture across all time have tried to solve this core human dilemma. So it's not like we're in this new world where all of a sudden we have vice versus virtue. It's an ancient challenge, but there are clear, scientifically proven solutions that are fun. Like, this is a fun, for me, exciting, engaging conversation. So creating that within our educational environment, is a deep passion of mine.
Well said. All right, so let's connect your passion, the way you live, the way you're a father, to what you do for a living. Tell us about Heroic.
Yeah, so Heroic is a public benefit corporation. As I briefly mentioned, I spent half of the last 25 years as a founder and CEO, built and sold to social platforms before Facebook. One, when I was 24 years old, won a business plan competition at the Anderson School at UCLA, raised $5 million in 1999, dot-com boom. We were kind of a thing, sports and technology, hired the CEO of Adidas to replace me at 25 years old, right when the market crashed in 2000. Sold that, had enough to take a little time off. That's when I became a, quote, philosopher, studied, as much as I could and blah, blah, blah. Spent a few years doing that, needed to make some more money, started my second business, which was pre-Facebook, a platform for people who wanted to change the world. John Mackey of Whole Foods invested in that, sold it to another publicly traded company, et cetera, et cetera. I say all that because that leads to what Heroic is. So I waited 18 years for someone to create an answer to the social dilemma. If you've seen that documentary, on the unintended catastrophic consequences of companies that hack your attention, essentially. Long story slightly shorter, on election night 2020, realized, all right, waited 18 years, I'm going to create that. Creating a social training platform that uses the best of social and persuasive technology to bring out the best in individuals. But that's the essence of what Heroic is. We help people move from theory to practice, to mastery together, integrating all these ideas on ancient wisdom and modern science to be the best, most heroic version of ourselves so we can literally change the world.
One of the things that I speak to, and I don't know if this connection is valid, but when I speak to CEOs that are deeply religious and they use religion to guide their leadership journey and become better leaders and maybe help their team using, the principles of their religion. And one of the questions I always ask is, in the Bible, they don't tell you you can fire somebody or lay off 1,000 people. So how do you connect religion to work? It's and I know it's not a question anyone can answer, but that's why I always like to ask these questions. So as a philosopher CEO, how do you connect all of that stuff to the gritty and the somewhat the stuff that you probably didn't like to do at any point during your CEO career to your philosopher side of your brain. Again, there may not be an answer to this, but this is the question that always arises when I'm speaking to people who have a way that they want to live, but how do they do that in the business world?
Dude, yeah, I think that's an incredibly powerful question. I think there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. Obviously, no single one simple answer. But first and foremost, man, I mean, you read the Bible, the parable of the talents is intense. If you closely read that parable that Jesus offers, and how ruthlessly one is treated if they do not put to use the gifts they are given, right? Like that's intense in terms of the demands made upon us from a faith perspective by our Creator. But then I think, frankly, the answer is really simple. So whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or Confucianism or Taoism, they're telling you the same thing, which is, once again, live a life of purpose by being committed to being your best self in service to something bigger than yourself. How do you do that? You live with virtue. What virtues? Wisdom, discipline, love, courage are the cardinal virtues of every wisdom tradition. So my pursuit and my commitment is to integrate those virtues and to try to build a business that is driven by the virtues that my heroes would aspire to embody. So I've actually got Jesus on my wall. You can't see it in my studio, but he's upper left because I was raised Catholic. Now I've also got Winston Churchill, I've got Epictetus, I've got Gandhi, I've got Aurelius, and I'm thinking every single day, what would they do? And life involves hard decisions. Life involves choices. But Jesus was a heroic individual, and he made hard decisions. Look at what he did, going up against the accepted norm of the time. And then part of building anything in life is being willing to tolerate what my coach calls, Phil Stutz, who's in the Netflix documentary Stutz, calls hatred and misunderstanding. That's leadership 101. And so we need to make hard decisions at times, and sometimes that will include potentially laying people off in our company. I mean, this is a fact of reality. Now, you can do that with wisdom, discipline, love, and courage. I've done that multiple times, as any entrepreneur has who's started a business. Most of us have. Over the last 25 years, you go through it 3 times, and you're going to have ups, you're going to have downs. But you can do that, again, with wisdom, discipline, love, and courage. And you can be thinking about the humanity of the individuals with whom you're interacting and facing those challenges head on and communicating with love and compassion and doing your best to help them transition smoothly. But I think, if I'm a Christian, it's, well, what would Jesus do? And there's an ultimate mission that we're serving as stewards of our business, in which we need to honor all of our stakeholders, not just the employees, but our investors and our employees, of course, our partners, our broader world. And that, again, demands that we show up and do our best. But then you got to be the change you want to see. You need to be your absolute best. So you need to be executing what I would call your protocol, such that you're showing up, you're connected to your inner spirit, what the Greeks called your daimon, what Christians would call your conscience, and checking in and doing your best within the constraints of your reality. Very long answer again, but what a wonderful question. We could talk about that for a weekend.
I'm sure we could. You mentioned Phil Stutz, who co-authored The Tools. And one of the things that's remarkable with The Tools, and even with your book as well, is the magic of simplicity. And even during this conversation, you breaking down Stoicism, it's pretty simple. But we live in a very complicated world, Brian. How can we simplify the complex that we all live in? Because sometimes, again, we do this to ourselves. We make things more complicated than it should. I always say that to my coworkers. I'm like, we're making this harder than it is. And from your studying of philosophy and even just being an entrepreneur, why do we get in our way? Why do we make things harder than they should be?
That's a very good question. I come back to the individual. So for me, I believe that, as the CEO of my business, I'm the company's most valuable asset, my consciousness. So any leader in any organization, whether that organization is your family or a company you run or a company you're part of, you are that company's most valuable asset, is my vantage point. So then the question is, well, what are you doing to enhance the value of that asset such that you can lead effectively? And then the most basic fundamental things become the most important. Eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, focusing your attention. I kind of go John Wooden on it. So John Wooden's, my favorite coach. I'm a UCLA Bruin, but all-time greatest coach. What did John Wooden have his players do when they showed up to the first practice? I imagine you know what he had them do.
The pyramid thing that he does, that pyramid.
Oh, he's got a pyramid thing, which, by the way, all the pyramid was one virtue after another. That was John Wooden's key to success. Guys, if we live with these virtues, we're going to win the championships. But he had guys like Lou Alcindor, of course, before he became Kareem, Bill Walton, the best athletes of that era going to the best program of that era. And before he would let them touch a basketball, he would teach them how to put on their socks. The most basic fundamental act of a basketball player is putting on your socks. And he would personally show them how to do it. So my thing is, we've got to simplify this whole process and figure out the few things we do that when we do them well, we give ourselves a shot at showing up powerfully. And again, my entire life's work is distilled into the 7 objectives of the book, where we continue to simplify and simplify and simplify. But ultimately, I think we need to get clear on who we are at our best and then make that prior best our new baseline. That's a Josh Waitzkin phrase from The Art of Learning, the great chess player turned martial artist, etc. So I want to know who you are at your best. What did you do and what did you not do when you were at your absolute best in 3 things: your energy, your work, and your love. And then what I do is systematically help you architect a protocol such that that's who you are consistently, especially when you don't feel like doing those things, when you're getting hammered by life, is when you double down on that protocol. So those are some of the ways that I simplify it. And I did not simplify my response particularly well because I got all struck by that's a really good question. And then you extend that into your business and what you're doing leadership-wise. But you got to lead yourself first. And most of us are feeling this level of burnout, enervation. We don't get the importance of dominating the fundamentals. We don't get the importance of having a strong sense of grounded, calm confidence and energized tranquility. And we just haven't trained ourselves to show up on the most basic fundamentals such that we can handle the complexity of our modern world.
Here's my take on why I think we overcomplicate things is, have you ever tried to pick up a grain of rice with just the one grain of rice using your hands? It's almost impossible. And I only know this because I feed my dog rice and there's rice everywhere. So it's hard to pick up that one piece of rice, but it's very easy to pick up a whole stack of rice. Like you could just grab a whole stack of it. And I feel like sometimes we all want to bite off more than we can chew. We don't want to do that single thing, picking up rice one at a time, because that's really, really hard. It's easier to just give me everything. Give me all the information. I'm going to watch YouTube videos for days. I'm going to read all these books. I want to just consume all this information. And I feel like we have this yearning to just want things that we sometimes lose track of, just the simple things of just learning that, like the 7 steps you talk about. I'm sure you don't want people to work on all 7 steps in one day. It's all about moderation and learning it one at a time. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, to everything you said. And then the biggest problem that I think most people suffer from is they're playing the wrong game. So objective 1 in the book, we've worked with 10,000 people in a coach program we have. They're playing the wrong game. And again, this is a 2,500-year-old challenge. David Brooks talks about in The Second Mountain. Psychologists talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. But most people have been seduced to go after the fame, the wealth, and the hotness. And the reality is, even if you are successfully pursuing those things and Instagram followers and square footage in your house, etc., you are, scientists say, less psychologically stable than people pursuing the intrinsic motivators. Then they're very straightforward. Become a better person, deepen relationships, and make a contribution to your community and your family. So intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation is the most important thing to get right. When you understand that living a good life comes down to that, you make different choices. Then you're paying attention to Stephen Covey again, who said that, hey, oftentimes people get up to the top of a ladder and then they realize they put it up against the wrong wall. So you're chasing the wrong things, and the faster you go in the wrong direction, the further away you get from where you really want to be, which is what David Brooks talks about. You get to the top of the first mountain, you look around, you're like, wait, I did everything I was told I was supposed to do, but I'm not feeling the things I was supposed to feel. Perfect. So slow down, check in, and see if you're playing the right game. And that's life-changing. You step back at half an inch from a very sick society and you realize, look, if 80% of us are anxious or depressed and nearly that many are overweight and obese and have diabetes or another chronic disease, maybe I shouldn't be doing what everyone else is doing. Then you look at it and go, all right, well, what's the ultimate game? Again, be your best self in service of something bigger than yourself. Then you can systematically re-architect your life, which is objectives 2 through 7. And you can create deep, sustainable joy and meaning. But I think everybody's on that hedonic treadmill, they're on that whatever you want to call it, rat race, spinny little thing where they're not getting anywhere and they're just getting more and more tired the more they go. So stepping back, simplifying, playing the right game, I think is the most important part of the process. And then it gets exciting because then you realize, oh, I got it. Okay, cool. I've been through that enough. You and I both have enough gray whiskers to know that game only gets you so far. Nothing wrong with it. It's important to have a lot of those variables. But if we're predominantly pursuing those things, we're never going to feel the deep sense of grounded joy that we want to experience.
Love that. All right. So that's a little on the esoteric side. So no, as a CEO, I want to pick your brain more on sort of the tangible stuff that happens at work. And I wrote about this recently about this project management mentality that companies now seem to have, where it's not about doing something well, it's about doing it. It's about checking the box. And as someone who didn't sort of grow up in corporate culture just as a radio guy, plus being a child of immigrants, it wasn't just about doing it, it was about doing something at the best of your abilities. And because of the technology we've talked about, we're training people nowadays to not think about doing the best of their abilities for a job. It's all about going to that project management software and clicking the little box that the project is completed. And I'm sure this is something that you've tackled along the way. I'm sure when you first started pre-Facebook, the project management software was basically a pen and paper or a chalkboard. But now it's become a little more complicated, and it's insinuated itself in all of our lives if you work in any kind of office environment, whether there's projects involved. As we start to wrap this up, what do you think about that and how the culture within offices is changing to that mentality?
Yeah, I think that Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz talk about this really, really intelligently in their great book called The Power of Full Engagement. So anytime I hear the word management preceded by project management or time management, I think of them. So they say, look, you're getting it wrong. If you're starting with time management or project management, you missed a step, the most important step, which is energy management. So most people are feeling burned out and innervated. I mean, in addition to doing things that never should have been done in the first place, violating Peter Drucker's rule number 1, first things first, second things not at all. And, there's no greater waste of time than doing efficiently that which should have never been done in the first place. So you got to know what the ultimate target is, the ultimate mission, and what your true high leverage things are you need to do, of course. And then you manage that project. But you can get so busy checking off little things in your project management software, you miss that. But then more importantly, you miss the energy management. You're not taking care of yourself. So in pursuit of things that frankly often never needed to get done, you're just running and running and running. And you're wondering why you're so burned out and so enervated and so tired. So I like to step back and start with energy management. And then scientists also tell us that your zest is the word they use for the virtue for energy, is the virtue most highly predictive of your flourishing. So if you're burning yourself out and enervated, you will not show up powerfully in your work or in your love. So you got to start with energy management in my mind. And I realize that may not be the answer you're looking for, but that's how I approach it with our team. And I'm thinking about our team and I'm saying, all right, I want to bring out the absolute best in them such that they can help us create a world in which we bring out the absolute best in others. So we have in our app a certain, we call it a soul force score, which is a measure of how consistently you're doing the things you said you would do. Aura, rings, readiness score, all these different scores. Ours is soul force. How energized are you? How focused are you on what's important now? And how consistently are you doing those things? That's what we hold our team accountable to principally. And it's my belief that when you get the fundamentals dialed in and you're showing up as your best self, you tend to, like John Wooden, win the other games. So I always start there with Abraham Maslow. Let's help the individual self-actualize themselves. And together, we will actualize our business's potential. And again, many more companies are getting that these days, but I think that's a really important thing to start with. Then you've got the energy, the discipline, the wisdom, the discipline, the courage, and the love to show up and do what needs to get done, and perhaps challenge some of the ideas you're talking about with the ways that projects are managed, how you're dealing with conflict, and all the other things.
Awesome. All right, so let's wrap this up. You mentioned that you are teaching your children the importance of philosophy and stoicism. And growing up, my mom always said to me and my brothers, I don't care what you do for a living as long as you're happy. If you're happy and you're nice to people, that I've done my job, is essentially what my mother said. So looking at the future, what do you want your children to look like? What do you want their lives to as a grandfather, when you look and it's like, yeah, I nailed it. I did the right, I set my kids on the right path and they did this thing. What do you see for their future, and what do you want them to be? Like my mom said, I just want you to be happy and be nice to people. What do you want to see in your children?
Yeah, I mean, I want them to embody wisdom, discipline, love, courage, and the other virtues we've discussed. And, my wife is as into this stuff as I am. We homeschool our kids, and we're committed to creating the central culture for them, which is a whole nother conversation about letting peers become the North Star for your kids. I mean, that's always been a challenging thing and a toxic thing these days. So I want to embody the qualities I want them to embody. And then we're raising little iconoclastic heroes. I mean, I dedicated the book to the reader, the hero we've been waiting for, to my wife and my kids, and then to the parents who are raising the next generation of heroes. I think we need more of us coming alive as parents, striving to embody the ideals we hope our kids will aspire to embody, and then do the hard work to have the strength to raise them well and to model the things we want to see. But ultimately, your mom nailed it, of course. It's eudaimonia, is what the Greeks called it. It's deeper than happiness. So when you live with ARETE, you experience the summum bonum, the greatest good of life, is what the ancient Greeks described it as, which is eudaimonia. It means good soul. It's a deep sense of joy and meaning and purpose when you've dedicated your life to something bigger than yourself. That's what I hope for with my kids, and that's the biggest challenge of my life, hands down. Energy and work, challenges in different domains, but easy, relatively speaking. It's the love. It's being a good husband, being a good father, and committing to being my best for them day in and day out. That is my deepest commitment and biggest challenge, and hopefully ultimate reward.
That's awesome. Well, I can guarantee you that my mother growing up in communist Cuba did not read Greek philosophy, but she probably picked it up through osmosis. So
did she have a faith tradition?
Yeah, she's a Catholic.
So then my entire life is my mom, dedicated Catholic, 10 years old, 12 years old. I did something she didn't like. She grabbed me by the shoulder, shook me, and said, God gave you gifts. You must give them to the world. But this proves the point, is that, and actually she did by extension, because Catholicism was deeply influenced by both ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. So Stoicism is imbued throughout Catholicism. So again, all these traditions say the same thing, and not surprising at all that your mom, a woman of faith, would be so clear on what was most important for you. And I was going to ask you where you were from, so that's great. I appreciate you answering that question.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. I feel like I wear my working class, child of immigrants, sort of like on my sleeve, because I'm very simple in the way I live my life, Brian. Like, I work hard and I try to treat people right. I always finish every podcast talking about the golden rule. And as much as I try to oversimplify things in complex matters that we've been discussing today, just for folks who may be listening who are like me, who don't know all these things, I just want to learn as much as I can and leave this world a better place than when I got here. So I appreciate your time, Brian. His name is Brian Johnson. He's the founder and CEO of Heroic. His book is ARETE, Activate Your Heroic Potential. That's available now. Brian, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Joe, I appreciate you, man. Great chat.
And that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you don't mind, please leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila or TikTok at J Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.